All right, let's get started. Good morning, dearest friends. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today, Tuesday, July 5th.
60 Thomas.
What is today? Above Tammuz?
Above Thomas. Yeah, we're one day ahead.
One day off. So it's the 6th of Tammuz. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Right now, we are studying Masechet Shabbat, chapter 17, Kol HaKelim, talking about Muksa. We just got off of a discussion attempting to handle two seemingly contradictory sentiments regarding, well, it started with a challenge from a text about Yontif, Muksa, not allowing something even though it was L'tzorech Gufay. The Gemara swats that away, rejects it by saying that there was a specific reason that it was prohibited because of Xera, Shabbos, and Yontif, and the fact that it's not a Kli. So the Gemara went off on what we might call somewhat of a side discussion to ascertain if we do or do not make Xera of Shabbos. We don't restrict items that should be otherwise permitted on Yontif because of the confusion that would occur for Shabbos. We had a text, a Mishnah that indicates that we do. We have a text, a Mishnah that indicates that we don't. And we try to understand the apparent contradiction of mi gazrinan, mi loy gazrinan. And to do so, we try to explain that maybe it was the machlokes of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shua, which was the story of the a mother and child, animal fall into a pit. Can you save both of them? Rabbi Elazar says no. Rabbi Shua says yes. And it was a question we said maybe of how extreme, how restrictive are they when it comes to making a gzeira to prohibit an act that would otherwise be permissible on Yontif. Shabbos, that's rejected. And then the Gemara says maybe it is a machlokes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel both talk, or they debate about carrying a person or an item that's of importance on Shabbos. On Yontif. Beis Hillel says no. Beis Shammai says yes. And we say that might explain, do we make a gzeira? That's Beis Shammai. We don't make a gzeira, that would be Beis Hillel. And then the Gemara says, hold on, but that's only about carrying, not about muksa. And then the Gemara concludes that actually muksa and tiltal, muksa and carrying are extremely related. And as you may recall, when we began this parak, we read the Rambam, and we saw that there were a variety of explanations, a variety of reasons behind the laws of muksa, including, we mentioned at the time, the possibility of it to be about to avoid carrying something that to carrying a yontif, and by creating many restrictions, it would assist us in minimizing what we carry, how we carry, and our mindfulness around it. And so that's how the Gemara ends off, somewhat resolving this apparent contradiction. The Mefarshim point out, the Rishonim point out that this whole discussion is somewhat replicated in Maseches Beya with a slightly different result, and all the commentators, Tosfos, the Ramban, the Rashba, and even the Halachis, they all quote the other Gemara in Beya. And for the halachic conversation, one would take into account that Gemara as well. For the purposes of our learning here, I think we're going to leave this Gemara at that. And we're now going to resume our broader discussion about the permission to carry something l'tzarech gufay, to be used, l'tzarech mekaymai, because of its place. And we're going to now explore some of the Amoraim, some of the sages of the Gemara, and how they navigated and how they paskin in this regard. I'm going to hit mute all just for some background noise, but we'll invite everyone to kindly unmute comments and questions. And so that is that. You see, Reb Beryl, I preempted you this time. Let's share the screen, and we can get started. Just want to remind you before we start this Gemara that there is a machlokes between Rava and Rabba. Rava permitting carrying an item, even if its primary use is prohibited, you can use it both to use and you can move it for its place. Rabbah says something that is primary use is prohibited. We're going to go back to our hammer. So that is only allowed to be used for an alternate use according to Rabbah, but you would not be able to move it for its place. And our Gemara here is going to revisit and see how specific Amoraim paskit. So, to us, it's been several days and it's hard to refresh our memory, but to the authors of the Gemara, we're expected to be entirely fresh. The entire Gemara, so without skipping a beat, the Gemara continues. V'yaf Rav Savar Lak Leha de Rava. Rav too holds in accordance to Rava. What did Rava say? The Amar Tzarich Mekaimai Kitzarich Gufay. Rava is the one who paskins that if you're allowed to move something to use it, you can also move it because it's taking up an important spot that you need. The Amar Rav, where do we see that Rav holds like Rava? That Tzarich Mekaimai and Tzarich Gufay are identical.
Hello.
Mar Shalo Yiganev. Rav taught you're allowed to move a hoe so that it's not stolen. Zehu Tiltel. I'm sorry. Mar Shalo Yiganev. We're one to move a hoe to avoid being stolen. Zehu Tiltel Shalo Tzarich V'Aser. That would be considered unwarranted carrying of a muktzah item, and it is prohibited. So Rav makes a restriction. He says you cannot move a tool that's left in your front yard and exposed to thieves. That would be tiltul shalei tzarich because you're not doing anything constructive with that implement. Well, this just shows us Rav being restrictive. How does this teach us that he permits moving something with tzarich mekaimai? So here's how we have to reverse engineer the teaching of Rav. Taima, why does he say that it's asur? Shelo yiganef. He only moved it. It's asur because the reason why he's moving it is to avoid theft. And as Rashi points out, theft is dumya dumi itself. To move something from being stolen is like moving something out of the sun. To help preserve it, the asur b'davar shmlachta le'isur, and you're not allowed to move a muksa item just for its own preservation. But if you're actually going to use it, or if you need its place, mutter Rav would allow it to be used. So again, just to repeat, we have a famous machlokes that we read 2-3 days ago between Rava and Rabbah about if a tool that is prohibited. We always use the example of hammer, but here the Gemara is using the example of a hoe. It's asur. What you do with a hoe is work the ground. You cannot do that on Shabbos. Rav says you cannot move it away so it isn't stolen. And we infer from here that you would be allowed to move it, to use it to, I don't know, what would you use a hoe that is permissible use? Maybe to crack nuts. I don't know. But if suppose you could find a permissible use, there's got to be better instances, but that's the...
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a question that's off Makomo. So to me, it's off Makomo is just as nebulous a reason as that he moved something mechama letzila or shelo yiganev. I mean, all three of them are not letzorach gufa. So why make a difference between letzorach mekomo that's mutar and this is not the first time. We saw it another time, and the other situations, which also, not letzorach gufa. They say you're not allowed to. Why dafka mekomo is mutar?
Why dafka mekomo is permitted?
Yes. I mean, it's not letzorach gufa, but it's not much of a difference. That then he moves something from the sun to the shade, or there's a reason. There's a reason for mekomo. There's a reason for moving it. There's a reason for moving something so it wouldn't be stolen. So why say those two are not permitted, and this one dafka the mekomo is permitted?
You're asking a very good question. What you're asking, and I might punt on this just for the moment, but you're asking why, for the preservation of the item, we restrict movement, but for the place underneath the item, we will allow you to. It should be the same. That is either they should have the same reason to either be permitted or prohibited, right?
Right.
So basically, you're asking, please explain the reason behind what's wrong with tzarech l'tzeil and what's right about l'tzarech mekayma. I'm going to have to get back to you to give you a proper, comprehensive answer. And you're asking a good question. The fact that I don't have a canned answer for you is something that needs accounting for, but it's a good question. So let's put on the side for now. But it's a necessary discussion to really to dig deep into the reasoning behind the distinction between the two. On a very basic level, however, I'll tell you that l'tzarech mekayma kind of.
The only difference I see is that he gets an immediate benefit for it on Shabbos. On Yom Tov.
Right. So let's start exactly. Tzarech mekayma is a yontifly permitted, acceptable, reasonable use. Because the place, there's nothing wrong with the place inherently. You're just getting the muksa item out of the way. Whereas if you're moving it with tzarech, you're moving it to the tzil, all you're doing is servicing something that is entirely, so to speak, doesn't exist on Yom Tov. So I think we could dig deeply. If we would really want to probe this, we could on our own come up with good
I would say
ICIs.
the difference is that Tzarech mekayma, he's benefiting, he's getting something that benefits his being, his well-being on Yom Tov. So he's misamach himself. The other ones have no specific effect on his well-being on Yom Tov. That something will not be stolen or moving it from the sun to the shade. It has no effect on his body, on his mental well-being. If he needs a place,
You're saying it doesn't
sit
enhance
down.
your Shabbos at all.
What?
It doesn't enhance the place you need for a Shabbosly permitted use. But the item being stolen, of course, you don't want it to be stolen, but it does not contribute at all to Shabbos or to Yom Tov.
Right.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
okay. But
Very good. Very good. The Gemara is not going to accept this assertion lying down. We're going to, of course, challenge it and probe it, not from the text itself, but from another anecdote also about Rav. Ini, are you certain in Rav really paskins that you're allowed to move something with l'tzarech gufay and mekaymai? But Rav Kana, there's an episode of Rav Kana who visited Ikla Lebei Rav, who went to Rav's house. Ve'omar, I see lahu leishusa lechana leisavala. Rav said, "Hey guys," he told his staff, "please bring a net for Rav Kana to sit on." Lav lememra, doesn't this tell us the davar shemalachte leisur, an item that is not allowed to be used on Yom Tov? If you're not allowed to hunt, you're not allowed to trap fish or butterflies. Would we not infer l'tzarech gufay that and put it to actual use? In l'tzarech mekayma loy, but you would not allow to move it even l'tzarech mekayma, which this would be consistent with Rabba's opinion. Let's read Rashi. Shusa is a mesuda, a net. Lav lememra. Lamali lefroshi behedi deleisavala. Lav mishum lememra dahideshari letiltul mishum detzarech gufay. From the fact that he says, "I see leishusa lekano leisivala." So Rashi says the highlight, you have to underscore the words leisivala. Why did Rav add those extra words leisivala? He probably wanted to teach us that it was dafka to be able to sit on it. But if you just wanted to move it out of the way, that would not be allowed. That's what Rashi says. Why does he say leisivala? He should have said, "Bring a net." And we'd understand. That's what Rashi says anyways. So the Gemara continues and says, no, this is in truth what he was saying. So the Gemara answers, the reality of the story was a little different. He said, Shakulu Shusa Mikame Kahana. Please remove this net to clear space for Rav Kana. Rashi, the Nesiv al Makoima, Ka'amar, let him sit in the space where it was. With Tzarich Makoima Udava, and in that case, Rav was actually being utterly consistent with our previously asserted viewpoint that he was endorsing, promoting, and in actuality having something moved. To move the net out of the way so that you can sit in the location of the net. That would be a classic tzarich mekaymai. The Ibai is saying alternatively, maybe what happened was Hasam mechamo litzel hava. It's possible that the net was actually sitting out in the sun. Therefore, if Rav would not explicitly say, I need the net for Rav Kana to sit on it, the observers would make a mistake in his intention, and the observers may come to a conclusion that you're allowed to move something mechamel itzil. So again, based on Rashi's explanation of the Gemara, our question was born out of the words, leisiv Allah, to sit on it, which we thought was him ruling out that you could move something in Mekayim. The Gemara answers no. Either they actually were removing it so he could sit on the clear ground, which would be evidence that you could move something in Mekayim, or because it was being removed from the sun, he needed to clarify that he was not doing it to preserve the item, but in order to give Rav Kana a seat. Let's read Rashi. Mechamal etzel hava b'makom hara lahaisa, was in a place that was not ideal for the maintenance of the net. The parish behed yaleisiv Allah. And had he not explicitly said that he wants it to be sit on it, man dechazi, the observer would think, Savar, Michamal is al-Shari, so basically the Gemara, interestingly enough, has two different answers, which cannot both be simultaneously true. The story would be very different if they were moving it away or they were bringing him a net to sit on. But either way, the Gemara has at the very least managed to preserve or show how this story would not contradict our narrative that Rav Paskins like Rava, not like Rabba, that Rav is more lenient and allows an item to be moved with Sarech Gufay and with Sarech Mekaymai. So that is, again, the anecdote and clarifying or specifying what his viewpoint is. Here, Rabbi Steinsaltz just says the Rashi we just. Now let's see another story along the same subject of what to do with something that is needed to be moved with Sarech Mekaymai. I'm sorry, Mechamal Etzel. If something is in danger, in jeopardy, can you move it? So let's read the story. Interesting. Okay. Rav Mari bar Rochel. Someone called Rav Mari bar Rochel. Of course, we should know it. I don't have his biographical information, and I was hoping that maybe the Safari would, but I clicked on Safari and they don't either have biographical information about him. But Rav Mari bar Rochel, because although it's not unheard of to have somebody known by his mother's name, it's not entirely common. Oh, let's see. Wikipedia in Hebrew has something. Let's take a look. Encyclopedia Yehudis. All right, bear with me for this detour here. Encyclopedia HaYehudis online. Rav Mari bar Rochel is also known as Rav Mari brother Shmuel. He points out, I guess we don't have to read Wikipedia like a text in Gemara, but he says unlike other sages of the Gemara who are known by their father's name, Mari is known by his mother's name.
Yeah, well, apparently his mother, he was born.
Oh, hold on. First of all, that's literally what I'm reading right now. So, but we had him, I think, in the beginning of our Gemara as well. She was a captive and may have been raped in captivity.
Well, his father converted afterwards.
Or, doctor, we have the same texts.
Yeah.
So I'm sure. Do you see this? You see my screen, or you don't see my screen?
Yes, I see his screen now.
Or maybe the father was
actually, I have a different text, but it's
a warrior, a soldier, a Babylonian soldier who converted afterwards, before the birth of this man. So therefore, the Gemara calls him after his mother. Of course, he was 100% Jewish, but he's not given his father, because the father was a Gentile at the time of his conception. He did not have halachic association to the father. However, when it came to inheritance, Rav Murray had trouble inheriting his father's estate, and there were complications, but that's the story. So I don't know if we actually read of Rav Murray Bar Rachel or someone similar to him. In the beginning of our Gemara, we also had someone. By the way, here, I didn't realize this text, just out of curiosity. Wikipedia, the Freie Encyclopedia. This is a Yiddish wiki. I did not know it existed till this moment. But if you want to read, Rav Murray Bar Rachel is given an Amoida in the dritten Dor. It is given der Sohn von Rachel. Sein Tat hat geheißen Isser Gyura. Rachel is given the Tochter von Shmuel, the Chava von Rav, der Sohn von Abba. Shmuel is given a Kohen. So long story short, this was a grandson of the famous Shmuel, the doctor we read about, with tragic events or unfortunate events in the conception of this child. In Shas and Asach Pletzer Verta angerufen Rav Murray Bar Rachel. Oh, you see, brachas tazayin Shabbos piches. Okay, so I knew we read about him previously. Anyways, here we go. So now let's get out of the tabloids and back into the Gemara.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Rav Murray Bar Rachel Havale Ahu Bei Sadi of Yosef B'Shimshon. This was a very devout sage of the Gemara, and he was in the time of Rav and Shmuel. His grandfather was Shmuel, his mother's father. So Havale Ahu Beis Ad Yosef B'Shimsha. There was a problem. He had curtains, felt curtains, says Rabbi Steinsaltz. And Rashi says the same. Korim Shalevet Shakorim Filtra, felt. And they were in the sun. And the sun, obviously, these cushions, these pillows, were susceptible to be harmed by the sun. So also the Kamei de Rava, he approaches Rava and he asks Amarle. So let's see, Rav and Shmuel, they were like the first generation Amoraim. His mother would have been, I guess, the same generation as Rav Yosef and Rabba, let's say. And he lives in the time of Rav and Abaya. That's what I'm going to imagine. Third generation or so. Fourth generation. Amar lahu, so he asks Rava, Mahu letal talino, am I allowed to move these curtains indoors? Amar le, Rava answers, Shari, you can bring them indoors. You know why? Because cushions are not melachtom le'isser. And as you may recall, long ago, several days ago, when we read Rava's opinion, we know that Rava's interpretation of the Mishnah that we analyzed were that something that is permissible to be used for its primary use on Yontif can even be moved, mechamo litzel. It's allowed to be moved from the sun to the shade. Amar Le, he responds, Shari, it's mutter. And of course, Rashi points out, Rava's being consistent. Rava litamei. The Omar, Rava's psak, his halachic opinion is, davar shemalachta leheter, is something that its primary use is kosher on Shabbos. For example, pillows, you're allowed to lay on a pillow on Shabbos. A pillow's primary use is mutter. Af, michama, letzel mutter. You can even move it for its preservation. So he says, I don't understand. Is li achrina. I have alternate cushions. I don't actually need them on Shabbos. So Rava says, yeah, but chazul la'orchim, you'll need those cushions hypothetically if you have guests. So he said, yeah, but isli nami la'orchim, I have extra guest cushions too. Let's look at Rashi. Isli achrini, I have other cushions. Eini tzarech legufay, I don't actually need to use them. So he says, yeah, but they are l'tzarech gufay for guests. He says, no, isli nami la'orchim, I have other cushions, so my guests, I don't need them for guests. Amar lei. So now Rava answers, Galis adatoch, you have revealed your perspective, the cherabos sfirolach, that you wish to paskin, that you follow the halacha of Rabbah. So you know what? Here is my amended, revised halachic advice for you. The chuli al mashari, the whole universe, anyone in our town is allowed to move these cushions without a problem. Excuse me. L'didach shari, l'didach asar, but you are not allowed to move these cushions. So you know what the problem is? You know, they say today one of the biggest problems society has is on the smartphones, on the phones, we send text messages. And the problem is on text messages, you don't hear the tone, the emotion. And so in a text message, your friend could say, hey, I got a raise. And you could answer back, great. And great could either be with an enthusiastic excitement for your friend, or it could be read as, oh, some kind of cynical great, or great as in who cares. And so one answer, one word, or one sentence can have many meanings. And this is a great, and you know, but it doesn't stop there. The person misreads the text and responds reactively to the way they understand the tone of the comment, but there is no tone. And so in the Gemara too, we have a little bit of a challenge, which is when we're recording a conversation and we aren't really informed of the emotions or the tone, we're just informed of the response. We don't know necessarily if Rava is exasperated. He's saying, you asked me a question, I gave you a halachic opinion, but you keep on pushing back. Evidently, you're not accepting what I say. You seem to hold like Rava, and therefore you may not move these cushions. And that could be an exasperated, cynical response.
Rabbi,
But that's not necessarily, and I'll tell you, it's necessarily not how to read this Gemara.
Rabbi, it's very clear that he's pushing him. He gives him an answer. He pushes further. You don't need punctuation.
Well, no, I'll tell you why not.
Sort of
Because if you
egging
are
him
an
up.
intellectually honest person, and you ask a Rav a Shaila and you get a heter, but you say, hey, maybe the Rav didn't consider that there are factors that would actually not support my case. And so maybe he's being very frum, and he's making sure that he's providing the Rav with all of the data necessary. So he thinks, oh, Rav said I can move it, but probably because he thinks I need them. So I want to clarify, I don't need them. And Rav says, yeah, but you could still need them for your guests. He says, no, I absolutely don't need them. So we could read this as a very simple, he's being entirely honest. He's not looking for a loophole. He wants to follow the essence of halacha. And maybe Rava too.
But look
is
at
being
Rava's
very-
answer. Rava's answer
Rava's
smashes
telling
him
him,
out.
based on what I'm picking up from how you speak, it's clear that you believe that you cannot move something with Sarech Mekoimai, and therefore you should follow your reasoning. Let's read Rashi. The Cherabah Sfirla. The Amar Mechamal Etzil Aser. The Halacha Kirava. The Halacha follows Rava. The Amar Davar Shemlach Laheter. A kosher to use on Shabbos thing is Shari Legamri. The Davar Shemlach Iser. The Tzarech Gub become Mutter Lechamal Etzil. Shalei Ganav Aser. So the Halacha follows Rav, follows Rava. So let's see. The Chassam Sofer asking an interesting question. We have to understand. If he followed Rabbah, why is he asking Rava? If he wasn't interested in listening. So basically our question, or Rebel's question, it's clear that he's not accepting the answer. He's pushing back. And you know what? Rabbis have this all the time. When someone asks our advice, we give our advice. They say, and I'm sure physicians, and we all have this, or kids, our grandkids, ask us our advice. And then when we give our advice, like, no, but and they don't like the answer. So they didn't really want to hear our advice. They just wanted some confirmation. They wanted us to affirm their previously determined sentiment. And as soon as we don't do so, they're frustrated. So the reaction usually as a parent or a rabbi or a doctor is, if you don't value my advice, why are you asking me? And some Sofer asked that question. If he follows Rabbah, why is he asking Rava? And also, what's this whole thing? Chazi la'archim. What does it mean it's good for guests? If you don't have guests, it's not going to help you. And also, what's this thing, Lidi? For you, it's also, for everyone else, it's mutter. So really, I don't even know the answer. The questions are very affirming. Ah, very interesting. So if I understand the Chassam Sofer correctly, he's saying maybe at the onset of Shabbos, this person was familiar with Rabba's psak. Now on Shabbos, he discovers that this item needs using, and he maybe wants to ask Rava. And so maybe what's happening here is it's possible, if I'm understanding this correctly, and I'm not certain because I'm reading on the fly, maybe he's saying that this person had previously been a student of Rabbah or was under the impression that the halacha follows Rabbah. And he's exposing to Rabbah that his understanding of the sugya follows Rabbah. And so he's saying, being that your mind, this item was utterly muksa from you because you were following or under the impression that the halacha is like Rabbah, therefore you're bound by your own impressions, even though next Shabbos will be different if you're going to accept the psak of Rabbah. And his answer was no. Rabbah's answer is even this Shabbos you're allowed to use the cushions. You're not bound by your impression that the halacha follow Rabbah before Shabbos. You know why? Because there's a hypothetical where the cushion is not needed at all, according to Rabbah. So it's muksa. But if guests arrive, you can dust them off and take them out. Because now they're needed, they're not muksa. And so that's Rabbah's answer. Therefore, Rava's telling this guy, they're mutter now. Even if you follow Rabbah until now. Even without guests, because Rava paskins that they're not muksa. And even if you were under the impression that they're muksa, there's a way to get them unmuksad. But once he says, yeah, but I still have guests, and they should still be muksa, and now and now he's exposing that he really held like Rabbah, and the excuse didn't help because he already knew about the Archim beforehand, and so now he says the taka muksa. Take it or leave it. If you understood, good. If not, not. But I think it's cute. It's, to me, the main value for our conversation was that he affirms our question, which is what's going on? What is the conversation? And as you can see, it's dealt with. Most likely, the way the Chassam Sofer explained it, it's not that there was an exasperation. It's that they were really probing to get into his frame of mind before Shabbos, and if there's room for change. But being that he had utterly put them aside and never intended to use them l'tzarech gufay, because he had ample supply for guests, now he's bound by his impression of Rabbah. That is the Chassam Sofer on our Gemara. Quite interesting. Quite interesting. Now, and of course, as you may have noticed, Rashi, I think, points out, and indeed this is the case, halacha lamasa, we follow Rabbah. That you're allowed to move something that is kosher on Shabbos, that's not mu'asser. For example, a pillow. You can move it mechambel etzel. You can use it. You can use it for an alternate use. You can move it out of the way to put your kiddush cup down or whatever you'd like to do. All right, another related kind of story. Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Ashi, Amar Rav, teaching from Rav, ultimately the name of Rav. Mach beidois shel melas, a broom, ish kubosh mechabdim as a shulchan. These are like a fine kind of hand brush that's used to sweep off the table. Shel milsa Rashi begodim. So you have these brooms, the way Rabbi Steinholz translated, made of fine wool material. So it's a kind of wipe that's very delicate. It is not muksa. But shal tamara, if this similar idea, you have a broom made out of palm branches, loy, that's muksa. Rashi kain shalon lechaber sabais. It's kind of like the way the brooms were in the time of Rashi. The usher, it's prohibited mishum the ashvei gumais. It would smooth out holes. So Rashi explains that Rava says that they're prohibited because they're heavyweight and they can end up filling in a pit, says Rashi. Of course, as we've discussed many times before, what's going on over here? the time of the Gemara. What were the floors of people's homes made out of? Mark? What was the material of people's floors in the time of the Gemara?
Dirt.
Dirt. And so if you're going to sweep the floor just to clean it, you're going to inevitably be smoothing it out.
The dirt.
As you may recall, when we learned it long ago, or Gimel or Dalet, a long time ago, we discussed that maybe today is different, or likely today is different, because our floors are, Baruch Hashem, all finished with wood or tile or carpet or whatever else. And so on average, you don't have such a situation. If you recall, Tosfos talks about, maybe the Gemara talked about that there was a second floor that generally was furnished and that you could sweep. I think Tosfos, or I don't know if it was Tosfos, someone pointed out that nowadays, being that the Mishnah Brura Paskas, I think Lalacha, nowadays we do not have this kind of restriction that existed in those days. But as Rashi reminds us, at the time of the Gemara, it would be absolutely problematic to use the item. So again, let me just read this one more time. Brooms that can't be used on Shabbos are not muksa. But a broom that you're not allowed to use on Shabbos is also muksa. That's what Rav is teaching. I'm sorry, Rabbi Lazar disagrees and says Afshal Tamara, even a date broom can be moved. Let's understand what kind of use are you intending to do with the broom, the light broom or the heavy broom. If you're using it because you want to help me out over here, what would be a permitted use? What could you possibly do with a broom that's not sweeping?
I wonder if you could use the rod as the walking stick.
Maybe as a walking stick, or maybe the kids are playing with it. I don't know. We have to be creative. I'm having a bad dose of functional fixedness right now, and so I can't fathom the alternate uses, but it exists. If you have a permitted use, an alternate use, or it's in your way and you need to move it out so you could sit down or set your table. Would Rav think that you're not allowed to use it? Of course, Rav would agree that l'tzarech gufay and mekayma it is mutter. We know that Rav passes like Rava. Ella, what must be the scenario? That it's being moved out of the sun to protect the item, not to contribute at all to your Shabbos experience. Would Rabbi Lazar agree that you'd be allowed to move even a totally muksa prohibited item? So more answers. In truth, we're talking about moving an item from the sunlight. And that's why Rav says that you cannot move the item that's muksa. Indeed, how we're going to have to read it is that Rabbi Lazar agrees with Rav. Let's read Rashi. No one allows you to move a totally prohibited item for its preservation. Our answer is Rabbi Lazar. So the way the Gemara answers, Rabbi Lazar is mamish agreeing with Rav. So let's read it again. Ravashi mechbeda shemilas mutar loy shal tamara. Lazar Amar Av shal tamara. Lazar also agrees that you can move shal tamara. No. Chen Amar Lazar. How would that look? Hold on. Okay, we would have to be rephrasing the words of Rabbi Lazar, which is hard to read in the text. Let's see if the Rashba has it. So yeah, you see, the Rashba wants to Okay, long story short, everyone contends with the fact that it would be very hard to actually impose this opinion into the text as was quoted. So maybe we're revising the text or something along those lines. What we're going to do now, this concludes a relatively lengthy discussion in the Mishnah. I just want to zoom back in time so we can have a we can appreciate what we've covered here, starting from the Mishnah that says that you're allowed here. Remember this? All vessels can be moved for it's needed, for need and not for need. Nehemiah says, no, you can only move it mamish l'tzarech. We had Rabbah and Rava who each interpreted this Mishnah differently. Rabbah says l'tzarech means l'tzarech gufay and mekoymai if it's a non-muksa item, shalei l'tzarech, but if it's prohibited, and if it's mutter even on, if it has no malacha, then you could even move it shalei l'tzarech, which we said was l'tzarech mekoymai. And Rabbah says no. Even if it's mutter on Shabbos, then you can move it for any reason. Michama l'tzel, koymai, and tzarech gufay. And if it is prohibited, you do a malacha, it's a hammer, you can only use it l'tzarech gufay and mekam. Rechemdes says only l'tzarech gufay. So this is the Mishnah. We spent some time talking about what's l'tzarech gufay mekaymai. That gave us the opportunity to weigh in on a series of different issues. For example, dirty dishes, a medocha. And then we talked about the bekas, the woods. Can you use it? Why can't you use it? On Yontif, etc., etc. And the Gemara closes out with a series of episodes and events proving that Rav and others paskin clearly follow the viewpoint of Rava, or that they have the same viewpoint, which is that you're allowed to move something l'tzarech if it's permitted michama l'tzel. So clearly a number of different events showing us that Rav and Rava agree in the interpretation of the Mishnah that we are more permissive and more lenient, and indeed that's how the halacha works. Now we have a new Mishnah. We're going to study the Mishnah, but we're not going to go into the next Gemara. We'll stop at the Mishnah, and tomorrow we'll continue with the Gemara's analysis. So here we go. Kol hakelim hanitolim b'Shabbos. If you're allowed to carry a keli on Shabbos, shivrei nitolim imam. Broken off fragments are also not muksa. The Gemara, of course, is going to explain what we're talking about. Ubilvad, so long as you oisem ein malacha, the broken pieces are able to also do a function, some kind of use. Rashi, me'ein melacha, shum melacha, fila ein me'ein harishon. So you have a tool, not muksa, you're allowed to use it on Shabbos, and it breaks. And the broken off piece has a use, it's not muksa. Shivrei areva, you have a big bowl, mixing bowl. A broken fragment of it can be used, can be used as a lid. Shivrei zechuches, broken shards of glass, can be used to cover a smaller flask. They have to be able to do a similar to their original use. So a broken bowl, you can pour into it some, here he says soup, jello, and if it's glass, to pour in some oil. So we have machlekes here about a shard, a fragment of a kli. Does it need to be used for any type of use, or does it have to be able to be used for a very similar to original use? And so just to point out, again, we're moving on in the discussion of muksa, no longer from the specific types of kalim per se, but to what happens in the life of a kli. Sometimes a kli breaks. At what point does that fragment become muksa? At what point does that fragment not become muksa? And at this point in the Gemara, what we know is if it's useful, then it should not be muksa, but if it has no use, it will be muksa. Of course, the Gemara is going to get a lot more into the details, and with Hashem's help, we'll have a lot of fun as we continue our journey through the Talmud.
Rabbi,
yes?
Rabbi, shouldn't this be worded in a sense that a use for that particular person? When you have a shard, I I have to start to think maybe somebody could do whatever. It should be relatable to the person himself. If it's useful for him, then it's a part of a keli. If it's not, it's not.
So we'll get into that and so much more. I think we do need to note that there's probably a difference between the time of the Gemara and today. Today, thankfully, there's a relative degree of prosperity. So if something breaks, you throw it out for the most part, unless you live through the depression or and Shalom down, we should not get back there. But so today, in today's day, the philosophy would be very much not inclined to use something that's broken, something that breaks even a small bit, you throw out. But that was not always the sentiment. And again, we pray that we could remain as spoiled and
even today, if something breaks, I can think of many scenarios where you can use parts, you can cannibalize parts from one and then repair another. So the part in itself has no use. It cannot contain anything. However, it can be indispensable if you want to repair something else. And then that's its use, that you can then utilize the other utensil.
Yeah. Now we're going to end over here, but I do want to point out, I think I'm going to predict that Dr. Hammer, Dr. Hammer is busy, but if he wasn't busy, he would ask us, hold on, we're talking about shards of glass and we're thinking about their use. Aren't we considering the fact that in addition to the shards of glass that are being used, there are smaller fragments of glass that create a sakana? Why aren't we talking about the shards of glass that are sakana? If I had to predict, that's the kind of question that Dr. Hammer, that's the mahalach that Dr. Hammer would ask, and wisely so. And so I just want to let you know that we will, with Hashem's help, discuss as well how to handle dangerous items that also end up needing to be moved. Can we move them? How do we move them? And why may we move them? So I just, without getting into the details, I just want to let you know that with Hashem's help, we'll be addressing that too. And so not to worry. So a dish breaks. There are fragments. There are a number of reasons why you might want to move them. The items that can be reused, you need to reuse. The items that need to be thrown out would need to be thrown out. And the items that are dangerous, what do we do about that? So for that and so much more, I hope you'll join us tomorrow. I am going to end just a few minutes early. I also want to tease out now that with Hashem's help, starting next Monday, I would like to move our Gemara share till 9:30. So I'm just releasing that information with availability for comments. And tomorrow we'll assuming that I don't have any major protest, we'll how do you call it? We'll confirm and then schedule.
We'll implement.
And we'll implement. No, so the implementation will be next Monday. I don't want to start in the middle of a week in case someone's on, but next Monday, assuming there are no protests, I'd like to start the Gemara shir 9:30. I understand that for most of our members of the Chabur, it actually might be better, and it also might allow us to recruit another person or two out of davening. So again, I'm 24 hours for comments. If anyone has a major concern, I take it very seriously. The members of the Chabura have a very outsized influence, of course, on the direction and the course of the Chabura. Every single one of you are integral and essential. And so I want to hear any comments, but short of any protest, I'm thinking that by next Monday we can start at 9:30.
Rabbi, no pressure. If it doesn't work out, you'll go back to 10 o'clock.
Well, I'm not worried about the pressure. I want to make sure it's good for the members of our Chabura.
We'll see what's best. Don't worry.
All right, we'll be in touch. All right, so again, I'm going to run just a few minutes early. Yashar to everyone, and have a good day tomorrow with Hashem's help. We'll see everyone same time, same link. Shkoyach.
Yashar. Bye-bye.